Coming up today on Finance and Technology Insights, Brian and I both talk about starting up a business and what that's like on the benefits and retirement planning side. I talk a little bit about what that's like on the technology side. It's going to be a good show. Stay tuned.
Welcome to today's show. It's episode 44 of Finance and Technology Insights with Eric Buhrendorf from EVERNET and Brian Williams from Northshire Consulting.
How's it going, Brian?
Good.
Let's get into it. Do you still trust password managers? That's not rhetorical. I'm asking you. Do you still trust?
Yes. Do I still trust them? Maybe a little bit less, but the efficiency gains are so worth it.
And the security gains, using a password manager to just generate a secure password every time for every single account is significantly more secure than trying to remember a password. Multi-factor authentication. If you are abiding by our aggressive guidance, which is multi-factor. I think we just had a social post I went out today on this again. Multi-factor everything where available, and it's unfortunate that the qualifier is where available because it is incumbent upon the host of the account to provide multi-factor authentication feature. And unfortunately, and I said this before, we still see vendors not turning it on by default.
I was going to ask you that. So I think I have a mix. I think most of them are forcing it, but I still have the option, skip this step or remind me again in 30 days. But I think that's probably going away. It's going to have to.
I mean, Microsoft's trying to push that away from their Office 365. So I think they're making that mandated now, which is huge. We still see a lot of technical tools that we use to support our clients, still making multi-factor optional because the geeks are loud and they complain a lot and they and I see these software vendors all the time trying not to annoy the geeks, and I'm looking at this and like, how dare you act in a counter to the best interest of security, and not do something as important as multi-factor. Because with the LastPass hack, all these databases were siphoned off and downloaded. Now they can be brute forced, and then the username and passwords can be extrapolated potentially. But even with a username and password, multi-factor authentication is AKA two-factor. And again, unfortunately, there's confusion in that as well. Two-factor and multi-factor are the same thing. It is a second or more factor of security. Password managers definitely managing secure passwords, multi-factor everything. Now, there is a scenario where you can actually use the password manager to store your second factor.
Yeah.
And we do see that, and there are scenarios where that is problematic. So
that's an interesting point. Do you have I guess if they're separate, as a user or as an IT guy, a preference versus using a text code or something like a semantic VIP or something like that has a code?
Are you saying like text versus email versus the application?
Yeah, so like one of the logins I have, they're two factors, the semantic security code thing, so you log in and then you use the app. Some of them they'll text me the 6-digit code. Do you have a preference?
So the technology of that second factor is called timed one-time password.
Yeah.
And the question is, how can you be challenged and respond with the timed one-time password? They call it TOTP, timed one-time password. And the vendor may have the ability to text you the TOTP, the timed one-time password, email it to you, or you can pre-configure a relationship in your authenticator app, air quotes, which is what you were showing on screen there. Without a doubt, the authenticator apps to furnish the timed one-time password is much more secure, because email can be compromised, because we had SIM attacks, or where people are calling T-Mobile or Verizon and hijacking your cell phone account. I mean, that was incredibly that came to light 10 years ago or more. Yeah. That was incredibly easy for hackers to call your cell phone company, give them enough information about you, and convince the agent on the phone that the hacker was you, and then you can do a mobile swap of your SIM card, and now you can get those timed one-time passwords. So the app is definitely the strongest mode of security, but not without its faults, because if you are using the same authenticator app that you're using for your password manager, and your password manager is compromised, then there's a problem there. So now it's kind of like we're recommending maybe using a different authenticator app than from your password manager. So obviously all the keys aren't stored in one location. Right. I mean, the obvious fault of a password manager is the single point of failure. So like you have one big ass vault door protecting what's behind the door, but it's also one big ass target.
Yeah, definitely. And don't ever use your cell phone number as your username for any website. Should be a Captain Obvious, but I know there's some cell prone providers who had that as the default, right? So if you log into AT&T, your default username was your cell phone number. So if you have that stored in LastPass and LastPass gets hacked, they're like, oh, that looks an awful lot like a phone number. This guy lives in Hartford and he's got an 860 username. I wonder if that's his phone number. So
yeah.
Crazy.
So password managers still a necessary security measure. They will continue to be hacked. The question is, will we see the other players in the space that are really riding high on the fact that they haven't publicized a hack or compromise yet? That doesn't mean it hasn't happened. We just don't know about it. LastPass has been really responsible with their reporting. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out over the next year. I know that Microsoft and Google and Apple are working on passwordless technology. I don't know if you saw that or not. But
yeah, they've been saying that for a while. I don't know what the technology is like that for a while, but even still, I'm not super comfortable. I know, like with like Google, like I wouldn't, if Google had a password manager that was like, even if I don't know, I wouldn't be comfortable with that. So I'd rather have it somewhere else. Maybe you feel differently, but
I think the idea is if you succeed in registering your mobile device with the online account in question, whether it's your iCloud account, your Google, Gmail, or whatever, if you successfully do register your cell phone with that service securely, the idea is when you go to log in, you tell them who you are, your email address, and they will just prompt you on your mobile device. Is this you trying to log in? And then you just say yes, and then you're in. So it's last year we saw that there was a particular multi-factor authentication can kind of work that way too. There's a way that where you don't have to type in the one-time password. It will prompt you to just yes or no. And we did see last year a MFA fatigue attack where hackers were trying to log into accounts and waiting for somebody to just accidentally say yes, allow on their mobile device, or just get so tired of it. Maybe they're like, I don't know, maybe Apple's trying to like do maintenance on the system. Just maybe if I hit approve, it'll stop asking me every couple minutes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so those are called multi-factor authentication fatigue attacks, or MFA fatigue attacks.
Right.
So
and those, a lot of the websites you go to will say, do you want to create your own username and password, or log in with your Google account, or log in with whatever, which I shied away from for a while, but I admit I'm starting to use those more and more.
And that's called SSO, and that's a really exciting technology because we use that for our clients and internally, because again, it's a single point of failure from a security standpoint, but it's also a single kill switch. So we can program all of the web apps that I so enthusiastically discussed in my last segment. You can take all your web apps, configure them to all use your Google or Microsoft identity to log in, And the benefit of that is your employees and your users can just, once they log into their email, for example, then they can just start opening their other apps across new tabs and new browsers. And if it'll say, oh, you're logged into your Office 365 account, great, we will let you into this software. No username, no password, no multi-factor authentication prompt. So it's ease of use on the employee side and the resource side. It's also a single kill switch for IT. So when you have an employee who's needs to, is being terminated or needs to exit, you have a single kill switch for all of your apps that support that single sign-on. So that's what that is. And then you're seeing it on the consumer side, where like if you go to Facebook.com or you just go to some other system and it says, hey, do you want to log in with your Gmail account? That is a consumer facing version of single sign-on, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. And relating back to news, so Amazon is offering up their buy with Prime. They're actually offering that up to, which is, I guess, in a way, a form of sort of single sign-on. So if you're going to, Jane's Doilies or whatever and buying something on their website, you'll be able to use that buy with Prime. So you're not entering, doing another username password.
Yeah.
So
PayPal was kind of doing that right?
Yeah.
PayPal
Shopify too. But I guess,
Shopify,
Amazon's such a dominant player in their space. They have had that open, I think, for some larger retailers, but now they're opening it up and making it a little bit easier for smaller retailers to use that. So I guess that's probably a good thing, but same sort of thing, single point, but also single kill too. So I guess that's a good thing.
And I'll just end that saying, like, traditionally in security, the more usable something is, the less secure it becomes.
Yep.
And there's that relationship. So hopefully the brain trust in Silicon Valley will solve that problem someday.
Yeah, we hope so. Yeah. I mean, the phones are good because they have the built-in camera, so you can do fingerprint stuff, you can do iris stuff.
I know we're running long, but did you look at CES? You know what CES is?
Yeah. Is it officially called CES, right? It's not called it's not an acronym
it's
anymore.
The Consumer Electronics Show, which is It takes place in Vegas every year. It's massive. It's like the biggest trade show for consumer electronics. It's largely turning into a transportation show. The car manufacturers are having huge, like bigger and bigger presence there, which is just telling. Which we've been saying this: the EV and the car of the future is becoming a platform, a smart platform. It's becoming a technology platform, and the car manufacturers are knowing that, a la Tesla. Anyways, just to tie it in, they're starting to put fingerprint scanners and biometric in the cars. So unlock the car with your thumbprint, start the car with your thumbprint. Mercedes is saying your preferences in the vehicle can be bound to your biometric. So your music apps and your seat positioning and your steering wheel positioning and any preferences that they have are. So I don't know, it's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I like that a little bit better than tying it all back to the key or the phone. I mean, I'd hate to be at an event, drop my phone, and then somehow that somebody goes and steals my car because I dropped my phone. Like, that's never made me super comfortable. And it's one of those things where just because you can doesn't mean you should. I mean, it's cool technology to be able to do that, but
but don't forget that if properly implemented, you have to be authenticated on your phone first in order to use the phone as an authenticating device forward.
But then at that point, it becomes like, if I'm walking to my car in a parking lot, do I want to just press the unlock button, or do I want to unlock my phone and then tell my phone to unlock my car? It's just,
I want facial recognition at the door.
Right. That's what makes sense.
That would be nice.
Or just have it built into to your handle, right? You put your
as soon as you make the point of contact. Although some of these cars are popping the door open automatically for you. I think the Tesla Model S and X do that.
Yeah. As long as
we're in a raffle.
As long as they can detect how close the other car is to you and whatever. Like, I'm sometimes nervous about doing the remote trunk thing of the Volvo. I got to do that. I got to be in pretty close line of sight to make sure I'm not nailing the car behind me. But generalist kind of model, like, oh, I provide all benefits. I think that's sort of going away, as we talked about niches in our open.
Can you get detailed about that?
Yeah. So you may have what's traditionally called, this should be the air quote episode. I'll make the air quotes here, like the benefits broker type of thing, who comes in there and is like, dealing cards. Like, what do you want? You want health insurance? You want payroll? You want 401k, whatever, that sort of stuff. And I think that old model of just kind of bundling everything together and getting all these big, massive savings. And for me, it's been my experience, what you get is kind of a low end boilerplate kind of stock, whatever. And there's still in our business specifically, there's a semi-technical term of being bundled versus unbundled. So you can kind of combine some services just in the retirement plan space. But my business is all retirement plans. We don't do health insurance. Just for me, my goal is to be the expert in the retirement plan space, and then anything where I'm not is to bring that expert in, right? So it's not.
Well, what does the benefits team look like? If a typical company today wanted to be relatively well-rounded for a benefits, air quotes again, benefits plan or package for their, this manufacturer, 15 employees, 10 part-timers, 5 full-timers, and a self-employed owner, right? Sole owner. What constitutes a benefits package? Where do you fit in there? And then where do you fit in making the relationships or the introductions to the, what is, like, just to paint that picture.
Yeah, that's a really good, and remind me later to talk about a book that I'm reading, because I wanted to bring this up to you too, but
nice.
Sort of falls on those lines. But I think initially with a small business, so you're opening a small business, you're in the strip mall, you're hanging out a shingle, whatever that is. Usually there's like a textbook way to do it probably, but usually it comes down to whoever you might have a relationship with. So let's say somebody knew me, they were my neighbor, and they said, hey, I'm opening up a business. Can you come in and talk about benefits? So then their initial contact is me. So I'm going to say, all right, well, you need a payroll system, right? So you're either going to do it yourself, which I probably wouldn't recommend, or you're going to
remember those days.
Some of your accountants, or they may have somebody who does payroll in-house. So that might be a fit, or you might be on a payroll platform. So that's going to be an item. You're going to have your retirement plan, which I'll handle, and you're going to have your health insurance. So those are probably the three core functions. Okay. Yeah. I mean, from there, you might get into, if you were offering some sort of group disability plan, a group life insurance plan, or something like sort of next level. But I'd probably kind of start with those three. Now
the payroll person, what is that? And I know that may not be your space, but I feel like you orbit in that space, right?
Yeah.
So just so we're complete in this messaging, the payroll person makes sure that the business is collecting payroll taxes, income taxes for the individuals, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But then they're also helping in all of the other, in the life or the health insurance and the retirement, they're also helping making sure that the money's being routed appropriately, right?
Right. And that's when you sort of get into the weeds, and obviously there's some sort of crossover services, but you want your 401k to be able to talk to your payroll solution. You want those to be integrated. So the simplest form would be zero integration, which is typically you're downloading a file from your payroll and then maybe uploading that to your 401k. So even in the worst case scenario, it's maybe 10 minutes of labor, which isn't the worst thing in the world. And then your next level is what they call a 180 integration. So that's typically where the payroll company talks to the 401k company, meaning they submit the contributions, but there's no talk back. Meaning if Eric goes on and says, I'm contributing 3% of my pay, goes on the 401k system, I want to contribute 4% of my pay, the 401k system will email the business owner and say, hey, update Eric's stuff for him. And then the business owner will update Eric's stuff in the payroll. So that's what's considered a 180. So kind of picture that circle going around. Okay. 360 is where the payroll company and the 401k company talk back to each other without any sort of labor involved on the business owner. So you might say, well, ideally that's where I want to go, right? It's because there's no involvement from the business owner. But I've also seen that sort of come off the rails once in a while too. So again, it's not a black and white world. I've seen somebody come in 6 months later and say, I upped my payroll contributions from 3 to 4%, and it never happened. And then the record keeper says, well, I emailed the payroll company, and the payroll company said, oh, the file wasn't in the right format. And the business owner's like, I didn't know. I thought it was 360. I'm out of the circle. So, again, in a perfect world, all that stuff works, but we don't sort of live in a perfect world.
So
but,
I was just licking my chops when you started talking about integrations.
And,
when you talk about that's what I love. So can you talk about specific platforms? How does that work? So I'm thinking ADP, Paychex, whatever payroll platforms there are, and then like you're the retirement planning vendor, is that, or if you will, and so there's some bank account. Is there one bank account that manages all of the contributions to the employees? That there's like the ledger controls the known allocation of the total, or is there a bank account for every employee that's under the management of the 401k plan? How does that work?
Yeah, usually it's so the company will have a bank account, obviously the company's corporate account. Some of them will have a separate one that's just benefits in and out, and but usually early on they'll just have that one corporate bank account. So it's usually one ACH that goes out. So you got 5 employees doing $1,000 a week. It's one ACH, and it'll say 401k ACH out of the company bank account.
$5,000 or 5 transactions of $1,000
5,
apiece?
one transaction, one ACH.
Okay.
So that'll go out of the business owner's bank account. And then if you really want to get into weeds, there's a custodian behind that who's usually not the 401k platform. So that's your a bank or a brokerage company behind that. And then the 401k platform, I always say, think of that as a technology platform that sort of lays over some existing infrastructure. So a lot of the 401k platforms, they'll use like a company called Matrix, which most people haven't heard about, but they're laying their 401k infrastructure on a banking or a brokerage infrastructure. So the money will go out to Matrix, and then 401k provider will connect with that. So the payroll providers, I mean, everybody's got their pros and cons. I mean, with the payroll providers, the good news is they're integrated. The bad news is they're integrated, right? So when something goes wrong, it really goes wrong. Something when it works, it works. When it doesn't, it doesn't. For lack of a better phrase. So some people will say, well, it's all in one spot. I'm cutting out middlemen or whatever. And then the counterbalance to that is you don't have anybody checking it, and there's no sort of checks and balances in there.
Right.
So again, not black and white. And for me, my whole thing is I want to come in objectively. So I don't have any preferred payroll provider, 401k vendor, mutual funds, anything like that. But for me, I want everything to work together well, but I also want it to be interchangeable, right? So very similar, I guess, to your system. You want all your softwares to be able to talk to each other, but if your CRM's really honest and truly not working, you want to be able to yank that out and plug something in without disrupting everything else that's working. So I want to be able to swap out a mutual fund, their mid-cap growth fund, if it's not working, and I don't want that to interfere with anything else. I want to be able to, if they're not happy with their payroll provider, I want to be able to change their payroll provider without affecting the 401k plan or without affecting the participant, or all that kind of stuff. So it's that balance of integration versus the ability to swap parts, hot swap, or whatever sort of technology you want to use there. So that's always my balance. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and she has everything sort of separate, right? Which is my preferred method, where all the parts are interchangeable. And she was having this issue with the payroll company. Not anything major, but she sort of went down that path of when it works, it works. When it doesn't, it doesn't. And she had something that was perceived as a minor issue, and they wanted to charge her $500 because that was their base, like special project labor thing or whatever. And I just said, listen, it's working with everything else. If you want another payroll provider, or at least want to look at something, here's 2 or 3 other names. I'm agnostic. I don't get paid on any of that. If anything, it's a little bit more work for me because I have to make sure all the parts are talking to each other, but I don't, my goal is to make the client happy, but I don't get, some advisors do, they get that like referral fees or finder fees or any of that nonsense. But for me, it's yeah, it's just not worth it. I just want, I don't want ever any recommendation I make to be clouded by compensation. So
Right.
that's sort of my umbrella. But yeah, I mean, that's the way I approach it. It's not the way every advisor approaches it, but it's make sure everything works together, but at the same time be able to hot swap, I guess, if I
Do
were
you
to make
see,
one sense.
do you see do you see any vendors out there that form like a consortium or some sort of or an exit or a business that basically says like there's you the investment advisor, there's the payroll advisor, there's the insurance advisor. I mean, do you ever see any whether companies or like I said, a consortium that whether your local chamber or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, you see that. You see, well, like we started talking about benefits brokers. You have your local benefits brokers who want to do everything, and they see that as their sales opportunity. And then I've also talked to people in the health insurance space, and they're like, yeah, we want to partner with 401k guys because we don't want to get into that at all. So
Right.
there's no right or wrong way to do that. I don't disparage anybody's business model, but then certainly at the other levels, you have record keepers who also own mutual funds, right? So you have like Fidelity has mutual funds. They own a record keeping platform. They're the number one 401k record keeper provider. And that's caused some issues for them in the past as far as conflicts of interest and that sort of stuff. Fidelity's own 401k plan was sued by Fidelity employees for using Fidelity investments.
Mm.
So, and they've all sort of gone through that. To me, I just laugh at that. I'm like, it's not even worth it. Like if I'm Fidelity, I'm going to use all Vanguard funds. If I'm Vanguard, I'm going to use all Fidelity funds with my employees, because how much really are you going to make off your own employees? Like to me, that's just stupid. But
Right.
anyway, so they've all, they all sort of have that crossover thing. So
at what point does a company bring a resource like you in-house? Does that ever happen? Or is that
I would
always an
say,
external resource?
yeah, I mean, bigger companies will have obviously an HR director of some sort. I don't know if 401k plan, I guess if you got to like a mega size, like if you're a Walmart, you might hire somebody to be like, all right, this is my internal 401k person who is, maybe not giving out investment advice, because you don't want to do that at a company level. But you might want to say, this person is in Bentonville, Arkansas, and home office, and they're going to coordinate all the 401k meetings at every location, and they're going to, so probably at that scale. But that's that line you don't want to cross as a business owner at any size. You don't want to be providing investment advice. A lot
So
of them
now
do, but
we keep talking about 401k. Now that's not the only investment vehicle, right?
no, I mean, your nonprofits usually use 403b, which is starting to look a lot like 401k. You have simple IRAs, which are sort of starting to also disperse or not really. There isn't really a use case for them anymore. You also have something introduced with our Secure Act, which is called the Starter 401k, which is a new vehicle altogether. You also have state-sponsored IRA programs. You have,
and how much of that do you manage or support? Are you just 401ks
no,
or are you?
No, I would say like the 401k. So things like the simple IRA, that was started because 401ks were expensive and complex. But as the complexity and the cost of 401ks have essentially been eliminated, the simple IRA use case just really isn't there. You won't see them started. There's a few in existence that once they're running, they're okay. But the use case for starting a new simple IRA now, I could probably argue at this point, is zero. So, SEP IRAs sometimes, which is a simplified employee pension, that's typically a relatively small business. You'll see that scenario because sometimes an accountant will recommend it. And then you sort of have to maybe steer them out of it if it's not the right thing. The SEP IRAs, the accountants like them because initially the contributions were later in the year. So you could, up until October 15th, if you had filed an extension, contribute for the previous calendar year. So whereas you couldn't with a 401k. So a lot of times early on, they might do a SEP the first year and then maybe convert it to a 401k later on. You've got solo 401ks for small business, which are obviously for a single sole proprietor and a spouse. So you've got that, and again, that comes with a conversation of, do you plan on hiring employees? Is there runway for that? Never. Is it 1 year? Is it 5 years? So that's comes with a conversation. But no, there's a lot of different things you can do with. You've got cash
But
balance.
you are the
plans.
resource to discuss all of those options.
Yeah, because again, I'm usually either getting paid a flat fee or based on assets. So for me, the umbrella that it's under doesn't really matter. Company calls you and says, all right, I broke away from my other law firm and I'm taking a couple admin people. It's me, another attorney, and 2 admin people. What's next?
That's actually a really common. That's funny that you went in with that. That is a very common scenario. We get definitely these very mature, seasoned, large firm attorneys, built a career, very vibrant career on a huge law firm, and for whatever reason they want to finish their career with their own firm. And that's a call that we get quite often, actually.
Yeah, which happens a lot in our industry too. And it's the barriers of entry have just really shrunk to be almost non-existent. I mean, the office space, paying 20 grand for a new server, all those sort of things that you used to get maybe 5 or 10 years ago. It's just too easy to spin up your own. It happens a lot in the RIA space.
Yeah, I call it business in a box. That was a term that was floating around a few years ago. I still kind of like it, because you can kind of say like, okay, your business can be in a box, literally. Okay, we need phones, we need computers, we need software, we need people, and and then you need a place, And actually now you don't even need a place if you're really shrewd or very, if shrewd, I guess would be the one word to say it. But if you're if you're clever enough that you want to, I'm one of those resources. We had an office in Hartford forever. We do maintain an office in Hartford when we need it, but otherwise our 100% work product is done remotely.
Yeah. So I'm going to interrupt you there as I'm curious about stuff. So 100% virtual law firms. Do you see a lot of those? Is it newer? Are they apprehensive about that?
So we're only 10 days into this year. So last year I saw a few call me and said we want to spin up a virtual law firm. And I was really excited about that call because that's what I'm doing with my IT company. There's so much power to it. You can be anywhere your clients are. The personal benefit, I cannot be overstated. It's, you're home for the kids, but then, you're still having conference calls and you're having meetings. During COVID, court was actually done in Teams meetings. The court was hosting Teams hearings. So it's just the legacy of, everybody driving into their law office to, is just unnecessary if you build a culture that doesn't do that. The courts want the firms to go paperless. So you're already coming up with workflows to produce digital paper rather than printed paper. So it's kind of ripe for that framework, and then there's really, there's companies. You ever heard of Regis?
Sure.
So, there's, and WeWork, that famous company that kind of was marred by their flamboyant startup leader. I forgot what his name, Adam. What was his name? Adam.
I don't know. I didn't watch that documentary. It's on my list.
It was pretty good. But anyways, those
not really a full-on documentary, right? What do they call those that are sort of mixed?
Docudrama, whatever.
Yeah, docudrama, docuseries, whatever.
Yeah. So anyways, these virtual offices powered by Regis, WeWork, it just facilitates that. And it was like in the tech industry, we call it, there's a term we use that we see a lot called convergence. The cell phone, the smartphone was a convergence of high density batteries, robust Wi-Fi networks, robust data supported cellular networks. I mean, when the iPhone first came out, it was on 2G, if you remember that. And then the 3G iPhone was really big because that was when data was really coming online. Right. Back then, I don't know if you remember, but you couldn't. Are you on Verizon or AT&T?
AT&T.
So I've been on Verizon forever, and back then when the iPhone came out, it launched on AT&T because AT&T supported kind of true data. So like you can be on the phone and still like an email would come into the phone. So like,
yes,
Verizon at that time when the iPhone launched, you could not get email. You would not be receiving data while you were on a phone call. So convergence is a thing. So it's when like all of these technologies kind of come together at the right point to give you something new and powerful. And that's what Business in a Box. That's when Business in a Box came out, is when you could order your phone service through a web browser.
Yeah.
If you go to ringcentral.com, which is one of the services we recommend regularly. If you go to ringcentral.com, you can buy a phone service, and then you download the app on your mobile, and you don't need. I remember years ago wiring offices for phones.
Sure. Yeah.
And then calling the local cable company or phone company to bring the dial tone into the data closet. And then we'd patch the dial tone into their local phone system in the closet that would then distribute dial tone and extensions across everybody's desks.
Yeah.
And then with hosted telephony, they call it VoIP, voice over IP. You just don't need to do that anymore. You just need internet, and now your phones are everywhere. Is that your phone system?
Yeah, that's RingCentral. Yeah, RingCentral.
Is that RingCentral?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And text, and it's archived, and
so
video and all that stuff. Yeah.
So then, we've made a lot of money over managing servers in that closet, which hosted databases, which ran software to run the business. And over the last 10 years, all of that went up to the web. And I say web specifically because the web is on the cloud. The cloud is just the internet.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this ad nauseum, but I'm trying to make this distinction that the cloud and the web are both on the internet, but the web is an application. You know what I mean? So we run our entire business in a web browser. Everything. I'm looking at you in a web browser. My email's in a web browser. My phone's in a web browser. Our business management tools in a web browser. This computer that I'm on has no local data. You know, and so now if your entire IT infrastructure is in a web browser, and you have your phone in a web browser, and your software is in a web browser, and your billing is in a web browser, your documents are in a web browser, and your office is in a web browser, right? So Regis, you go to regis.com, you say, yeah, let me rent a mailbox at your location, and that now becomes your office location. And per that relationship, if you need a conference room for an hour, you just go onto the web, you book the conference room, and all of your resources can go in there, have a very professional experience walking in there using that conference room. And by the way, if you want to host a client in Stamford or New York City or Boston, Regis is everywhere. So I'm kind of off the rails, but you asked me about kind of startups, right? And
so I'm thinking about how it relates back to our industry too. I mean, I think that was kind of a trend pre-COVID, is the term breakaway advisor. There is actually even a company called RIA in a box, which stands for Registered Investment Advisor. So there is
RIA in a box. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, so that's you're in a box theme, but yeah, I mean, that's definitely a trend. So along the same lines as the attorneys. I didn't know if the the legal world was a little more stuffy, and we got to be on Main Street. We got to be on Main Street with the old house with the with the white sign and the black lettering.
Still very much that. So yeah, to tie it back in, thanks for bringing me back to earth here. But yes, we did see a number of law firms call us and say, we want to run a virtual law firm. Can you help us get it up? I was really thrilled to do that and set them up in all these systems. Really excited to do that. But still overwhelmingly, and I mean, I'm a millennial, so I'll be 40 in March. I have friends. I've developed quite a few friends that are lawyers because it's through business and through my time spending in the legal industry, advising that pool of people. A lot of people my age still want to go into the office.
Yes.
Still want to go into court rather than these virtual hearings. So, I'm a technologist, so that's why I feel so strongly about using the technology. But I want, it's going to be interesting to see what the landscape looks like in 10 years from now. Using a round number, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 7, but in 10 years from now, when people 10 years are junior, so the 30 somethings that are definitely starting their law firms and getting going, what are they going to do? Are they going to do the business in a box? Or are they going to do the law firm in a box where the work is what matters, not what your lobby looks like, but you can still get that lobby experience, that secretary experience. You still get all that in these Regis locations. Yep. So it's going to be interesting to see how that pivots.
Right. And you wonder if it's some of these things you think, is it an age thing? Is it a generational thing? Right. Because they're not the same,
or let's face it, is it a work thing? I mean, I'm not an attorney. So does the work necessitate that physical location? Is it really that important? Is conducting a trial in the real really that important? I can't speak for that because I'm not an attorney, but that.
Right. And then there's of course, the marketing and the client acquisition. And, if you're awash with cash and whatever, and you're like, well, I can get an office downtown for $1,000 a month and stick a sign out, and it cost me almost nothing. Even if I never show up, the signage will pay for itself. I'll get one client a month from that alone, which will more than pay for it. So there's that aspect too, which I can appreciate, because I've thought about that myself as well. Like, am I losing clients because I don't have an office? Maybe not. I mean, is that an investment? Is it from a marketing standpoint, sticking a sign out somewhere, even if I never went, would it be worth it? So,
well, and there's another consideration too. Like when we went decentralized, that's the term I prefer, is decentralized rather than remote. But it is synonymous, I suppose. The other consideration is employee acquisition.
Yeah.
Some employees, when we decentralized in 2017, we had a number of employees who pushed back against the model. They wanted to drive to work. They wanted to listen to their podcast in the car for the half an hour on the way in and on the way out. And honestly, what's funny is our culture grew away from that. And those resources that didn't like that, they ended up moving on their own.
Yeah. And there is something to that. I mean, if I were probably to design something, it would be like a 15 to 20 minute commute with guaranteed no traffic, no lights, something like that would be kind of, because there is something to that. I mean, there's certain times where my wife will pick my son up from daycare usually, but then there's other days where it's like, dude, I haven't been out of the house. I've been in front of my computer all day. I haven't, if it's a rainy day and I didn't go for a walk or whatever, it's like, I have to get in the house and get in the car to change my line of sight to, just see what's going on in the world. So there is something to that.
The typical experience for the startup or the breakaway business, we look at them and we just show them that they can run an entire office in a box, in a web browser, run their entire business function, leveraging remote and web-based technologies. But that doesn't preclude them from having an office. They can still run a traditional office with traditional handset phones on the desk and traditional computers and office-owned computers, and the staff and the workflow can very much be traditional, but the tool set is just modern. And the added benefit of that is when Susie Paralegal is homesick or has something, but she can work in some capacity, she works from home. And she's empowered to do that. Her phone follows her, her software follows her, the data follows her, and the workflow changes very little. The attorney has a beach house. I see it all the time. I see it all the time. The attorney has a beach house down in Niantic or Milford and wants to do some work over the weekend or a 3-day or 4-day weekend. And same thing, the tool set follows them to that remote site. Or an associate they want to spool up an associate as a contingent or a bolt-on to their firm and maintain a second office, air quotes again, second office at a different in a different town. Having all of your tool sets in the cloud in a box, so to speak, just facilitates that. And we've been providing remote access and remote functionality to firms for the last 10, 15 years. But when you pivot to web technologies, it really supercharges that, really brings the IT costs, the support costs down because it's highly functional. The data is highly available. Very little kind of pre-set up IT stuff,
Right. And a lot of times, even in their physical location, it's still almost like a remote location, right? I mean,
exactly.
They may have a laptop that they plug in at home to a couple monitors and a keyboard and whatever. And then when they go in the office, they do the same thing, and they have mirrored technology and whatever. So
exactly. I mean, we used to say that the office needed to be hardwired because most of them were running local databases. And so the best way to connect to your database back in the day when it was like Access or SQL, you needed a hardwired connection for the best reliability of the database. And so you don't crash the database if there's a continuity issue. But the web is inherently a wireless supported technology. The way that the data moves back and forth from your computer to the web server is so well suited for a high latency or wireless air quotes again, wireless connection, because I guess the data set that you're looking at while you're in the browser is constantly like scoped. It's like, here's the data you called for, boom. And then like you can have interruption in your, like you can have static in the line, so to speak. And it's like email, you know what I mean? Email doesn't require a high bandwidth, low latency connection because it's like the system's like, did I get an email? Yep. Here's a new email. And then the connection is like, low data, so to speak. So just to put a bow on it.
Yeah, if you're working from home now and your database is on AWS or Azure or wherever in Colorado, it's faster than 5 years ago when you were connecting to your database that's in your server room 20 feet away. Because what you have locally is never going to be as fast as the stuff that's working remotely anyway. So
right. So find us on your favorite podcast app. We are on YouTube. Search for us at Finance and Technology Insights by Brian and Eric. I am the co-host, Eric Buhrendorf, CEO of EVERNET Consulting. We are an IT service provider supporting professional businesses all over the country. And I am joined every day by
Brian Williams, Northshire Consulting. We are an independent investment advisory firm based in Connecticut, working with small businesses and families. And you can see our stuff at websites, northshireconsulting.com. Online stuff is 401k and beyond, YouTube, and some podcasts now and then. And that's where you can find us.
And I think I didn't drop my URL. EVERNETCO.com. You can find me as well. All right, my friend. That's a good one. We got one in the books. I will see you next week.
All right. Sounds good.